I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store. For 3 weeks, he camped outside. Grandma, you little victim. What?
There's this rat hole that I've entered about our older parents. Sometimes you say our grandparents, we look at their marriages, and most times, even with now, people always make reference to our grandparents, our parents' marriage, how perfect it is. But what a lot of people don't tell you is the love story and how they got there. And now on the internet, people are sharing horror story of their grandparents' love story. Hey guys, how you are doing today? It's your girl Destiny here, and welcome to my channel. I hope you guys are doing fantastic. So this video is a video of a girl that started this conversation, but the story time that came with it was just so amazing. So this girl came online and she was just making this dialogue about our grandparents, sorry for the light, of how our grandmom shared the story of how she used to sleep outside our grandfather just to meet our grandfather and all that. And this has opened the rat hole of people sharing outrageous, scary, advantage taking stories of how their grandma and their grandpa met, their love story. They're just going to get you think about it, because most times when people try to compare the women of that time and the modern women and women of now, people always say, oh, our grandparents stood for the family, they da 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 da. When most times that was not the case. Most times these were younger girls that were taken advantage of. Anyway guys, let's go check out the original video, and then people stitch the stitch where the juiciest, so you want to watch the stitches. Okay, so let's go check it out. But before we go check out these videos, please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Please smash the subscribe button, okay? And if you like the channel and you watch a couple of videos, subscribe, okay? And click the notification bell, okay? We post videos every day and we have amazing conversations, so go ahead, you don't want to miss it. Anyway guys, with that all said guys, let's go check out the video.
I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store. For 3 weeks, he camped outside. He would throw rocks through my window with notes that said, please go out with me. Grandma, you little victim. What? Grandma, you little victim. What?
You guys know that scene in The Color Purple when Mr. comes to the house and he wants to get married, and the dad is like, well, Celie is twice spoiled, so you might as well have this one. That's my grandma. She had 2 kids. She was not allowed to bring those kids to her house when she got married. Thankfully, everybody was legal, barely. But yeah, she had to dump her kids onto her relatives in order to get married because her husband did not want to raise someone else's kids. Whoa. And then when I started to ask, I'm like, okay, well, was she in a relationship with her baby daddies before she got married? Not really. Well, did they date? No. Did they love each other? No. The kids just showed up.
Grandma, you little victim. What?
Alright, so my grandmother tells me stories about her parents all the time. All the time. Tells me these stories, how Papa taught her mom to do everything, and how she was glad that her mom died first because her mom wouldn't have been able to live if Papa died. And they just seem so magical and they seem so romantic. One day, I don't know, I just asked, I said, how old was your parents when they got together? This is my grandma that's still alive, her parents. She said, oh, I'll tell you later. He was between 25 and 30, and she was about 12. Whoa. I've been shocked ever since. It was a different time back then.
And I met him, and he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks.
I have this family member that every time he would get up in church and tell the story about how him and his wife met, he would say that he was picking his daughter up from the school bus and he saw this little girl on the bus and he knew that that was his wife. Yeah, the age gap is crazy. But the bad part is nobody in church was like, yeah, grown men after little girls on school buses is wrong. They were like, God really spoke to you. God really showed you. And it took me and my cousins years to realize that's disgusting.
Aw, you little victim. What the?
My grandma used to tell us this story about how she met my grandpa, and she was just walking home from school one day, and this man in his truck was behind her telling her how beautiful she was, and he would follow her home every single day. She was 15. He was not in school. Until she finally said yes to marry him. And my 13-year-old self was like, oh, he knew. He knew, and he loved her. But my adult self is like, holy shit, Grandpa, you're a predator. And no wonder why my grandma was such a bitch all the time. I would be too.
Grandma? You little victim? What?
So my grandmother's love story is a little bit different, okay? She got married when she was 14 years old. The guy at the time wasn't my grandfather, but he was 28 years old, okay? The marriage lasted for about 6 months, and she ran away and came back home to live with mommy and daddy because she found out that he was cheating on her with another man. Yeah, pretty shocking.
Please go out with me. Grandma? You little victim? What?
I debated sharing this story about my grandma and grandpa, but I've talked about it with my mom and so many people so many times, and I just want to share it. Okay, so my grandmother and grandfather got divorced and then remarried when I was 6 years old, okay? I was in the wedding. But before they got remarried, when they first got divorced, my grandfather was dead set on making sure that my grandma did not enjoy being unmarried. Okay, so anytime he found out she was dating, we lived in a small town, he would try to like just sabotage everything. Sabotage. Now he could date and be with many women, hence why they got a divorce, but she couldn't date nobody. And one occurrence that always stuck with me, and I would be looking at my grandfather for the rest of my life like, sir, was my grandfather saw my grandmother getting out of the car with a man because she was single at the time and she was coming from a date, and he went to the back of his car to his trunk and he goes and gets the pew 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 and decides to chase that man down the street, pew, pew, pewing all the way down the street, saying, if I can't have her, no one can. What? And then my grandma just gets married to him again when I turned 6 years old. Mind you, when my grandma was married to my grandfather, he would not let her drive. He would not let her complete her high school diploma or high school completion. So the moment my grandpa died, rest in peace, because he became a better man as he got older, my grandma learned how to read. My grandma learned how to drive. My grandma owned property. My grandma was an amazing businesswoman, but it was after he died. I learned everything about how to be a great woman when my grandfather passed away.
And he wouldn't leave my father's store for 3 weeks. He camped outside.
So when I was 20 years old, my family took a vacation to Mexico City to go visit all of our extended family. And my great aunt Eva took us around the town. We were on, I think it was a trolley. Yeah, it was a trolley system to get out to go see La Basilica in like downtown area, like the big cathedral that has the Virgen thing. And she's pointing out all these really cool landmarks, giving us a lot of history lessons. And then she's showing us really beautiful things like, oh, look, this is where your great-grandfather had this business. This is where we used to play when we were growing up. This is where your grandmother went to school. This is where our lemonade stand was growing up, because that's what my grandfather did as a side business. And that's the window of our house that your grandmother threw. What? My grandfather was considerably older than my grandmother when they met, and she was 15. My great-grandfather said, hell no, you guys can't date. That's terrible. Which is why I never accept the excuse when people say, like, it was a different time. No, it doesn't matter what the time was. People knew that was terrible. And in response to that rejection, my grandfather and his best friend conspired and broke into their house, my grandmother, and left my great-grandfather a note saying, if you think you can keep us apart, just know that I can have her whenever I want. And then my great-grandfather relented and said, sure, get married. She was 16. I think my grandfather, he was 26 at the time. And no one's ever told us this story. If you listen to the people in my family talk about their marriage, you would think it was the greatest love story ever told. Or really horrific. Thankfully, my grandfather changed his ways. Unfortunately, my grandmother had a very difficult life. They had a very hard marriage. She had 9 children, but like 13 pregnancies. And she died at 45 of a stroke. he completely reformed. Everything changed. He became what I imagine to be just a much better man, because I don't even recognize who the man is in some of these stories that I hear about him. He was the most precious man of my life while he was still with us, and I'm forever grateful that he got himself together. But, like, oh my God. I mean, what's more romantic than a little...
Romantic.
Grandma, you little victim. What the...
My grandpa stalked my grandma for 3 weeks when they were at UCLA together. He saw her, and then for those 3 weeks he would sit outside of her classroom and watch her walk into class until he finally got one of her friends to introduce them. They had a son who is my dad. And my dad followed my mother home from their college class, followed my mother all the way to her apartment, and left a note on her car.
That's creepy.
How do you think those marriages went?
Grandma,
Wow.
you little victim. What the...
My great-grandmother was one of the most kick-ass I've ever met or heard stories about. I swear to you, I get off energy from this woman. So when she was a teenager, that's when her family is like, you need to start courting, you gotta find you a husband, because all she had was an 8th grade education, and they really wanted her to marry somebody wealthy or with status. So she was courting this man, and my grandma, great-grandma, she fought back. Like, that's the story, is that this man was doing his thing, chicken wing, and she shoved him out of the carriage. He fell into the mud. The family was so embarrassed. They're like, you need to go apologize to him, and hopefully you could win his favor back. And my grandma's like, no, absolutely not. So then she meets my grandpa and falls madly in love. So my grandpa was born in 1900. She was born in 1905. So they end up getting married in 1924. He is 25 years old. She's 19 years old. He had served in World War I, and all he was a lowly farmer. Not only that, the family that he came from, he ended up inheriting the land. But I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to remember the exact story, his parents, his mother died in childbirth, and so he was like adopted by these as like a farmhand. So her family was just like, Clara, you cannot marry this man. And she's like, I'll do what I want. So she was married to him, and he died in 1949, which was really sad. He was 49 years old, and they had 7 kids. So this is where I'm like, I love this woman so much. So first off, she married who she wanted and just told her family they can go get bent. Then, after he passed away, a woman back in the late 40s, early 50s, with 7 children, who had a bunch of farmland and only an 8th grade education, obviously she's going to remarry, right? Absolutely not. Her quote is, any man that wants to marry a middle-aged woman with 7 kids wants to use her son as workhorses, her daughters for their own pleasures, and steal her land. And I'm not interested. Smart. This woman lived to be 100 years old. Like, one of my favorite things is I have a 5-generation picture with me holding my oldest daughter and her and my grandma and my mom. And it's just amazing to see. But I just think about that like, all of these stitches are so just depressing and awful. And I love so much that I have this strong in my family, because my grandma, her daughter, her story's not great. My grandpa was like all the other stories we're hearing, but my great grandma, man, like that's like, after my divorce when I became single, I kept thinking about how hard that had to be for her as a single mother in the 50s with 7 kids, with all of this land, trying to make it work, trying to raise these kids on her own, and adamantly refusing to marry. Because her thought was, I already married the love of my life. I'm good. She had 25 years with this man. 25, that's all she had with this man. And I said served the rest of her life. It feels like a sentence, yeah. Living. She spent the rest of her life with just her children, her friends, and she was content. One of the other quotes that she used to say that always cracked me up is she said, never trust a man. They would screw a snake if they could get so low. Woo. Now, she's obviously not with us anymore. She died in 2005. But I really wish I could have thought to ask her more about why she took such a strong stand, because that is just not common for that age of woman to be so like verbally like, don't ever trust men. Men are trash. I mean, that's what it is. It's that her generation's equivalent of men are trash. So yeah, there's a positive story with this trend that's going on, because most of the stories are negative. Mm-hmm. Also, my great grandpa was known as being an absolute gem as a human. He was just the kindest, big-hearted person. That's probably what my grandmother fell in love with. That's all.
Aw, thank you for sharing.
Oh, notes that said, please go out with me. Grandma, you little victim.
I'll never forget when I was over my grandmom's house one afternoon and we were looking through the family albums. She's kind of like our family historian. She keeps all of our records, keeps all the old pictures. Like she keeps track of all the family heritage and lineage in our family. And she was like, hey, do you want to see my marriage license from your grandfather? And I said, sure, I would love to see that. Like, why not? It's the actual original documentation from like 1956 or something like that. And as I'm reading over the marriage license, I did not realize how young my grandmother was when she got married. I knew she was young, but not that young. She was not only 15, but she was a ward of the state, and she was already pregnant with her first child, my aunt, who was the oldest. And my grandfather is about a good maybe 4+ years older than her, so he was well over the age of 18 when they were getting married. And she, from what she told me, she was like, the wedding day was a disaster. They went down to the courthouse. Her parents were not there. She was a ward of the state, and I think she had to be a ward of the state in order for her to get married because she was pregnant and they didn't want her to have the baby out of wedlock. And my grandfather's mom signed off as a witness. That was her wedding day. She didn't even wear anything white. She said she wore like a simple, like green dress or something like that. And then proceeded to have one of the most tumultuous marriages that I've ever heard. Wow. Like when I hear my mom and my aunts and uncle talk about their upbringing, I don't ever hear not one good story. He was a severe alcoholic. A lot of my memories of my grandfather growing up was hugging him and him smelling, reeking of whiskey because he was that bad of a drinker. It would seep through his pores. And he was a true adulterer. Like, she would tell me stories about how she would drop the kids off at the mistress's house so that she could have some me time. And like I said, the marriage didn't last very long. They proceeded to have 6 children. And the last child that she had, which is my uncle, was from her second marriage. And don't even get me started in second marriage, because he was worse than the first. He was not only an alcoholic and an adulterer, but he physically very bad. And so when this generation of women talk about reconsidering the thought of having children and the thought of getting married, it is because of those stories that we hear from our grandparents, our grandmoms in particular, that really is off-putting. And seeing all that we're battling with and dealing with with today's men, I don't know if I want to get married. I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards for me. But my heart breaks for her, because she really was just young and naive and had no guidance, and proceeded to have not one but 2 failed marriages, and in between those 2 failed marriages suffered so much. So, yeah.
Please, I'd love to know what you think about this conversation. And you have your grandparents' story, or you have a story of a grand aunt, grand uncle that you want to share. Please go down in the comment section, share your thought, but please keep it respectful as always. You're on the channel, we're allowed to disagree, but we do it in a respectful way. So feel free to share your opinion. For me, it is really interesting to hear this story, and like clearly, and I just want to give it to the creator that shared the positive story of how our grandmom stood on business and got married the person she wants to, and after her husband died, she refused to do it because of obviously she knows the game, she knows the intent of most men, not all, most men, and yeah, she stood on business. But it's really interesting that most of these back in the days, because most times when people try to compare women, they want to compare, especially women of now, with our grandmoms. They want to compare it rather than thinking of the time and what was happening there. Most women back in our grandparents' time, they were children when they got married. And you know that same way they say most men rather go for younger women than older women. It's because, like I've said a couple of times here on this channel, it's because they know they can easily manipulate, abuse the younger girl and get away easily with it, and yet the younger girl will stay put. And you can clearly hear most of the numbers of children. You can hear 5, 6, 7, 9 children from these stories, and it's ridiculous how most of these men, because these women, they already have this amount of children. Most times these women, they will not go anywhere. They don't have any form of education. They don't have any form of making money. They are going to stay put and just collect the abuse and just be hoping to God and pray to God for it to work out. So for me, it's really interesting, and I feel like for us as women, especially as women that we're trying to decenter men, try to look after ourselves, try to put ourselves first, try to preaching the gospel of taking care of ourselves, healing our trauma. It's really important for us to know this story, because we heard this story of, our grandparents were married for 50, 60 years and all that. We heard this story, and sometimes some of us ask the question, if our parents and our grandparents can do it, why can't we do it? Not thinking of how dysfunctional and how abusive such marriages, such union were at that time. And most times the women were getting the short end of the stick, and the women were just being in those marriages because they have to. That is the only way they could survive. It's really interesting how, like, here in my country, Nigeria, it still kind of happens. I remember there was this my younger friend that I was talking to, and she got pregnant, and she hid the pregnancy for me because obviously she knew where I was going to stand with it. She didn't tell me she was pregnant and all that. And months later, almost to the time she was about to give birth, she came to see me, and I was screaming at her like da 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 da. I'm saying this to say that it still kind of happens, especially in my society. It still happens, most of these stories. And I was like, why did you do this? Like, I was asking, like, well, do you know what you're going to get yourself into? Why are you doing this? And clearly, she said, she was like, oh, this is the man I've been with all this. And I asked, how long have you known this man? Because she's a younger girl. And she said she met him when she was in high school. He was in his 20s, that was already working, was chasing a girl in uniform coming back from school. And I told her, like, do you know your man is a predator? But she still could not phantom it. She still could not get it. Why am I calling her Mao? Like, your man is a predator. The fact, I said, he took advantage of you, and he's taking advantage of you because he knows he can go for his mates. You are the only one that is going to take what is ditching. And when you grow older, not just older, by the time you learn certain things in life, you realize what I'm saying to you. And she was like, oh, Auntie D, it's not like that. I'm just like, whatever. And I just like, you know what, I wish you're already almost giving birth. And now she has 2 kids. And for me, I still see that a lot in my society, in my culture, where most men, they want to take advantage of younger girls. They prior on the 19. Now, okay, yes, they know now they can go to jail and all that. I have a very good friend. She's like a sister, and she started dating this grown man when she was 12 or 13. Like, we're really young when the whole thing blew up. The father found out that this grown man was sleeping with his baby, with his child, and it was the father was almost like unaliving the guy and all that. And I remember we didn't see for a long time. I remember we got reunited, and we're just talking, catching up with our childhood. And I remember I don't know, the guy name came up, and she was like, you know what, you know, he was the love of my life. And I was like, what? Because after being young, and the guy took advantage of her and everything, even when she now got into university, she went ahead to look for this guy, and they continued their relationship. The whole relationship was very toxic because the father was not in support of it. The father does not even want to see the guy with his eye. The father was like, you did that to my child, da 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 da. And I remember I was talking to my friend. My friend was just smiling like, you know what, I don't know where the guy is. The guy still, I think the guy is late now. I'm not sure anymore. I can't remember what she said about him. That's because it's not important. I didn't keep it in my head. And I remember we were talking about, and she was like, do you know he's the love of my life? Do you know I still love him? And I was like, do you know that guy is a predator? That guy took advantage of you when you were 12. That guy was on top of you at that young age. That is it. I was so, the fact that we're even having that conversation, I was so pissed. And it was so crazy that we're having a conversation very like 2 years ago. I was so pissed because I just keep reliving everything and the entire incident, and it was really sickening how this guy was even, the guy slept with a cousin, an older cousin that was like 2 years older than her, and then started dating her and was claiming it was love. And for me, those are the type of abuse that goes on. And most of these men, especially the way the world is being centered, and especially when the home is dysfunction and these young girls are looking for validation, these men, they know these things and they are going to capitalize on it. So yeah, these stories are really sad, but this, I just feel like this is more like a conversation and a wake-up call for a lot of women to realize, not that, oh, they should hate men or anything. No, we're not here for that. We're just saying that put yourself first, love yourself, take care of yourself. You guys know the gospel we preach here. Build a community, join a community that can always remind you not to center men, but to put yourself first. Because when you do that, you have an upper hand to be happy. Because most of those marriages, most of those older weddings and marriage you think were, oh, from heaven, they were just predators taking advantage of younger girls. Anyway, guys, please go down in the comment section, share your thoughts. Love to know what you think about this amazing conversation down in the comment section. But please keep it respectful as always. Go on and share this video with someone that you want to be part of the conversation, because that's what we do. We have banging conversation. So go ahead and share this video. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, smash the like button, because this helps YouTube to push out my content for more people. And that will be you supporting this channel and this girl, yeah. Subscribe and click the notification bell, because YouTube will notify you once I upload videos, and I upload every single day, 2 videos every day, so you don't want to miss this amazing conversation and the community we're building here. So go ahead and subscribe. With that all said, guys, I will see you guys in my next video. Deuces.